Eddie Hearn's recent comments shutting down the idea of a potential showdown between Devin Haney and Keyshawn Davis have sparked a wider conversation in boxing about risk, timing, and the business reality behind elite matchups, and the situation becomes even more interesting when you understand why he compared it to the long-debated but never realized fight between Terence Crawford and Jaron Ennis. In Hearn's view, boxing fans often look at these fights purely from a competitive standpoint, imagining the best fighting the best without hesitation, but promoters and fighters operate in a far more calculated environment where every decision is tied to long-term earning potential, career trajectory, and the risk of losing momentum at the wrong time, and that is exactly why he believes Haney versus Keyshawn is not as simple as it looks on paper. From a pure boxing perspective, it's an exciting clash of styles, with Haney's technical discipline, defensive awareness, and jab-heavy control system going up against Keyshawn's sharp amateur pedigree, explosive timing, and growing confidence as a professional who many already see as a future world champion. But Hearn argues that excitement alone doesn't pay the bills at the level these fighters are operating at, especially when Haney is still trying to cement himself as a global pay-per-view attraction following high-profile bouts and championship success, and Keyshawn is still in the process of building his mainstream profile. Meaning the commercial gap between the two plays a massive role in whether the fight can realistically happen. Hearn's core argument is rooted in what he calls the risk-reward imbalance, where one fighter has significantly more to lose than to gain, and in this case Haney, despite his elite status and undefeated reputation in many fans' eyes, would be taking on a younger, hungry, highly skilled opponent with very little financial upside compared to other available fights, and even if Haney were to win, critics might simply say he beat a rising contender who wasn't yet fully proven at championship level, while a loss would be catastrophic for his brand value, future negotiations, and positioning in the sport's biggest money fights, including potential rematches, unifications, or legacy-defining bouts. On the other hand, Keyshawn Davis would benefit enormously from the opportunity, because a win over a fighter of Haney's caliber would instantly catapult him into elite status, making him a major attraction overnight. But that imbalance itself creates the problem, because the fighter with less to lose is always more willing to take the risk than the fighter with everything to protect, and this is where Hearn draws the parallel to Crawford versus Ennis, a fight fans have demanded for years as Jaron Ennis rose through the welterweight ranks with explosive performances and undeniable talent, yet Crawford, already established as an undisputed level champion and one of the most complete fighters of his generation, had little incentive to take on a dangerous young contender when the financial and legacy reward did not significantly exceed the risks, especially when he already had bigger unification fights and generational paydays available elsewhere. Hearn is essentially arguing that boxing's structure creates natural bottlenecks where the most exciting fights are often the hardest to make, not because fighters are afraid in the traditional sense, but because the economics of the sport punish risk-taking at the wrong time in a career, and he believes Haney is currently at a stage where every opponent choice must be strategically aligned with building maximum value, particularly after years of developing his name across multiple divisions and championship defenses. He also emphasizes that Keyshawn Davis, while already extremely skilled and rapidly improving, still represents an investment fighter from a promotional standpoint, meaning he is being built toward future mega fights rather than immediately inserted into high-risk, high-cost matchups that don't yet deliver equal financial return, and in that sense, Hearn is not dismissing the fight's quality but rather its timing within the business cycle of both careers. What makes this debate even more intense among fans is that modern boxing has entered an era where social media pressure often clashes with promoter strategy, as audiences demand the best fighting the best immediately, while promoters are trying to maximize long-term revenue arcs that involve carefully staged steps, and this tension is exactly what keeps matchups like Haney versus Keyshawn or Crawford versus Ennis in a constant, almost but not yet, category. Hearn's stance also reflects a broader philosophy he has expressed over the years, that fighters must be positioned at the right commercial level before being thrown into elite danger fights, because one poorly timed loss can derail not only a fighter's record but their entire earning potential for future years, especially in divisions stacked with talent where opportunities are limited and public perception changes rapidly after a single defeat. At the same time, critics of this approach argue that boxing loses its soul when elite fighters avoid each other during their physical primes, pointing out that legends of the sport built their reputations by taking risks regardless of financial structure, and they believe matchups like Haney versus Keyshawn are exactly what the sport needs to maintain credibility, competitiveness, and excitement. Still, Hearn's counterpoint remains consistent, that the modern boxing ecosystem is fundamentally different, driven by global broadcasting deals, pay-per-view economics, and carefully managed fighter branding, which makes every high-risk fight a major business decision rather than just a sporting one. And until Keyshawn Davis reaches a level of commercial drawing power comparable to Haney, or until external pressure forces the fight into existence through mandatory rankings or promotional alignment, Hearn believes the matchup will remain in the same category as Crawford vs. Ennis, universally respected, widely discussed, but ultimately blocked by timing, risk, and financial logic rather than skill or willingness alone. Eddie Hearn's stance on Devin Haney vs. Keyshawn Davis goes even deeper when you break down how he views the modern matchmaking system in boxing, because in his eyes the sport has shifted into a phase where fighters are no longer just athletes chasing the toughest opponent, but also long-term assets whose careers are carefully mapped to maximize value at every stage. And that's the key reason he immediately shut down the idea by comparing it to the situation involving Terence Crawford and Jaron Ennis, a fight that fans still talk about as one of the biggest missed opportunities in recent welterweight history. Hearn's argument starts with timing, because he believes both Haney and Keyshawn are at very different points in their career development even if they are close in skill level, with Haney already having built a world champion resume across divisions, pay-per-view experience, and a recognizable global profile, while Keyshawn is still in the process of transitioning from elite amateur pedigree into full professional star power, meaning their commercial weights are not equal even if their fighting ability is becoming comparable, and in boxing that imbalance is often what prevents big fights from being made. From Hearn's perspective, promoters and networks look at fights through three lenses: risk, reward, and replaceability, and in this specific case he believes Haney carries far more downside risk than upside reward, because Haney is at a stage where every fight is supposed to either build toward a massive superfight or maintain his elite status, not gamble it against a dangerous rising contender who has everything to gain and very little to lose. Keyshawn Davis, meanwhile, is in the exact opposite position, because a win over someone like Haney would instantly accelerate him into superstardom, while a loss would barely damage his long-term trajectory since he would still be seen as a young, developing elite prospect, and that imbalance is what Hearn calls a structural mismatch in incentives, which is why he believes the fight is unlikely right now even though it is highly appealing to fans. He also draws a direct line to Terence Crawford vs. Jaron Ennis by pointing out that Crawford, when he was the dominant force at welterweight, had already reached a level where only fights that significantly elevated his legacy or guaranteed massive financial returns made sense, while Ennis was still building his reputation and needed that kind of elite matchup more than Crawford did, which created the same structural deadlock fans now see with Haney vs. Keyshawn. Hearn's broader point is that boxing's biggest issue isn't a lack of talent or willingness, but a timing problem where elite fighters exist on different promotional timelines, meaning they rarely peak in market value at the exact same moment. He further explains that in today's boxing economy, fighters are treated like long-term investments, with promoters building them gradually through carefully selected opponents, televised exposure, and strategic stepping-stone fights before exposing them to high-risk matchups, and in that system, Keyshawn Davis is still in the growth phase, while Haney is entering the protect and capitalize